Welcome to PastCast. Join us as we dive into the events and lives that shaped our world.
Each episode reveals fascinating facts and stories from history.
Today, we're examining the Great Chicago Fire back in 1871.
Oh yeah, one of the big ones.
You've probably heard about Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicking over a lantern.
Yeah, right. The story everyone knows.
But did that really happen?
Well, that's what we're here to find out.
We're going to examine eyewitness accounts and theories about how the fire started.
Lots of theories.
And get this, we'll even explore some pretty wild speculations, like the possibility of a comet.
Now that's something I'm really looking forward to getting into.
Okay, so to start us off, can you paint a picture for us? It's October 8th, 1871. What was life like in Chicago at that time?
Well, you got to imagine like a bustling city, but one that's constructed primarily of wood.
Really?
Even the sidewalks.
Wow.
Now add in a long, dry summer, baking everything under the sun. And to make matters worse on that fateful day, strong southwest winds whipped through the city at speeds between 30 to 45 miles per hour.
So basically it was a tinderbox just waiting for a spark.
Exactly.
And that's where the O'Learys and their infamous cow enter the scene, right?
Well, that's the story that took hold. The fire did ignite near the O'Leary barn around 9 p.m., but Catherine O'Leary always insisted the cow story was false.
Interesting.
And interestingly, the city officially cleared her name in 1872.
So not the cow.
Nope.
So then what else could have started the fire?
Well, there are quite a few theories floating around.
Like what?
Some suspect a neighbor named Daniel Pegleg Sullivan.
Okay.
Because his account of that night kept changing.
Oh, so kind of suspicious.
Which makes him look suspicious.
So maybe he knew more than he let on.
It's possible. Another theory suggests that the green hay stored in the O'Leary barn spontaneously combusted.
Oh, right. I've heard about that.
And then there's Louis Cohn, who on his deathbed claimed he and his friends were gambling in the hayloft and accidentally knocked over a lantern.
Gambling in a hayloft. Talk about playing with fire.
You could say that. Some theories even get into conspiracy territory involving a check party, a carelessly tossed cigarette, or even extraterrestrial involvement.
Wait, extraterrestrials. Are we going full X-Files on this one?
Not quite aliens, but there is a cosmic angle to consider.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
On the same night as the Chicago fire, massive fires erupted across the Midwest.
Oh, wow.
In places like Peshtigo, Wisconsin, and parts of Michigan. This has led some to speculate about a common extraterrestrial cause, such as a meteor shower or fragments from Biela's comet.
So multiple fires igniting almost simultaneously across a large region. I can see why that might make people think of something from outer space.
Exactly. It's a pretty dramatic idea. Some eyewitnesses even describe seeing balls of fire falling from the sky in spontaneous ignition.
Wow. So is it like fiery comets raining down and setting everything ablaze?
Well, meteorites, which are fragments of comets or asteroids that enter Earth's atmosphere, typically cool down significantly before hitting the ground.
Aye.
So while a meteor shower might create a spectacular light show, it's unlikely to start widespread fires.
Okay, so not very likely.
The comet theory remains intriguing, but there just isn't enough solid evidence to support it.
Got it. So we've got a lot of possibilities, from a careless neighbor to a celestial phenomenon. But what we do know for sure is this. A fire started, the city was incredibly vulnerable, and the wind was whipping everything into a frenzy. What happened next?
What happened next is a textbook example of how a bad situation can quickly spiral into a catastrophe. Those strong winds weren't just fanning the flames, they were creating something called fire devils, or convection whirls.
Oh, I've heard that term. What exactly are they?
Picture this. The intense heat of the fire creates rising columns of air. As these columns rise, the wind interacts with them, causing them to spin. This forms a vortex of fire, a whirling tornado of flames that can reach over 100 feet high. These fire devils danced across the city, throwing burning debris in every direction.
So it was like the fire was alive, leaping and swirling with a mind of its own.
That's a great way to put it. And because most of Chicago was built from wood, the fire spread with terrifying speed. Burning embers were carried by the wind for blocks, igniting new fires ahead of the main blaze. It became a citywide inferno.
It sounds absolutely chaotic, a nightmare scenario. Wasn't there a fire alarm system in place at the time?
There was, but unfortunately it malfunctioned that night. To make matters worse, the first responders were mistakenly sent to the wrong location based on the initial alarm.
Oh no. So a delayed response in those critical early moments.
Right.
That must have allowed the fire to grow unchecked.
Exactly. It was a critical missed opportunity to contain the blaze before it became a raging inferno.
It seems like everything that could go wrong did go wrong. So
Right.
how long did it take for them to finally get the fire under control?
The fire raged for over 24 hours before a change in weather, thankfully bringing rain, finally helped extinguish it.
24 hours. I can only imagine the devastation after a fire burned for that long.
The aftermath was truly horrific. An area of 3.3 square miles was reduced to ash. Thousands of buildings were destroyed, and over 100,000 people were left homeless. It was a turning point in Chicago's history, a tragedy that forever changed the city's landscape and its people.
It's hard to fathom the scale of the destruction you just described. I imagine the eyewitness accounts from that time must paint a truly harrowing picture.
They really do, and what's striking is how those accounts capture not just the physical devastation, but also the sheer terror people experienced.
Right.
The wind, which we've discussed quite a bit, plays a central role in many of these narratives.
I can only imagine wind that strong must have felt like a force of nature, adding to the chaos and the fear.
Exactly. One account I came across described the wind howling like 1,000 demons,
Oh,
which gives you a sense of how unsettling and almost supernatural the experience must have been. People felt powerless against this element raging around them.
it's one thing to read about wind speeds in a report, but to hear it described that way with such raw emotion, it brings a whole new dimension to understanding the event.
Absolutely. And remember those fire devils we talked about earlier?
Oh, yeah.
Eyewitnesses described them with a mix of awe and terror.
Yeah.
Imagine seeing a swirling vortex of fire towering over buildings, spitting out embers like fiery missiles.
Oh, my goodness.
It must have been a truly apocalyptic sight.
It's chilling to think about. And the wind was also pushing those burning embers across the city, starting new fires far from the original blaze.
Right.
So even if you managed to escape the initial fire, you weren't necessarily safe.
That's a crucial point. The fire was constantly jumping ahead, making it almost impossible to predict where it would go next. It's no wonder people felt trapped and desperate. And of course, the fact that most of Chicago was built from wood just added fuel to this inferno.
It's like a perfect storm of terrible conditions all converging at once.
Huh.
So while these accounts highlight the role of the elements in this disaster, they also give us a glimpse into the human side of the story, don't they?
They absolutely do. These accounts are filled with stories of panic, narrow escapes, acts of bravery, and tragic losses.
Yeah.
We see families separated in the chaos, neighbors helping each other, firefighters risking their lives to save others. It's a stark reminder that history is made up of individual lives and experiences.
It's easy to get caught up in the statistics and the big picture. But these personal accounts bring the human cost of this tragedy into sharp focus.
That's so true. And it's through these individual stories that we can truly grasp the resilience of the human spirit. Despite facing unimaginable loss and fear, people found ways to help each other rebuild their lives and move forward.
Speaking of rebuilding, I'm curious about what happened after the fire was finally put out. Did those eyewitness accounts shed any light on how the city began to recover from such a devastating event?
They do. Many accounts describe a sense of shock and disbelief in the immediate aftermath, a city covered in ash and smoldering debris. But there's also a strong sense of determination, a will to rebuild and create a better Chicago.
So amidst the devastation, there was a glimmer of hope.
Exactly. And that's where the story gets really interesting. The fire, as tragic as it was, became a catalyst for change. It forced Chicago to confront its vulnerabilities and rethink its approach to urban planning architecture and fire safety.
That makes sense. A disaster of this magnitude must have exposed some serious flaws in the city's infrastructure.
It certainly did. For one, the fire highlighted the dangers of building a city primarily from wood.
Right.
So as Chicago began to rebuild, they implemented stricter building codes, mandating the use of fire-resistant materials like brick and stone for new construction.
So they learned from their mistakes and took steps to prevent such a widespread fire from happening again.
Precisely. And it wasn't just about the materials. The fire also exposed the limitations of the city's fire department. After the fire, they invested heavily in new equipment, expanding their firefighting force and establishing more fire stations throughout the city.
It's like they were taking a proactive approach, preparing for the worst while hoping for the best.
Exactly. They also recognized the crucial role of a reliable alarm system, given that the previous system had failed so catastrophically during the fire.
Makes sense.
A new, more robust system was put in place designed to ensure quicker and more accurate responses to fire emergencies.
So in a way, this tragedy became a turning point for Chicago, a chance to rebuild not just the physical city, but also the systems and practices that would make it a safer and more resilient place.
That's a great way to put it. And what's fascinating is how this event spurred innovation. The need to rebuild quickly and efficiently led to the development of new construction techniques and architectural styles, paving the way for the rise of skyscrapers and a new era of urban design.
So the Great Chicago Fire, while a tragic event, also inadvertently contributed to the city's architectural legacy and its emergence as a modern metropolis.
It's a reminder that history is full of these unexpected twists and turns. Sometimes even the most devastating events can create opportunities for progress and innovation.
It's a fascinating and complex story. We've covered a lot of ground, from the harrowing eyewitness accounts and the role of the wind and fire devils to the city's remarkable recovery and the innovations that emerged from the ashes. But amidst all this talk of destruction and rebuilding, there's still one nagging question. What truly started the fire? Do any of those eyewitness accounts offer any clues that might help us solve this enduring mystery?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, even with all those eyewitness accounts, the origin of the Great Chicago Fire remains a mystery.
Oh, that's too bad.
Some accounts do mention those balls of fire falling from the sky,
Yeah.
which might make you think of the comet theory.
Right, like those fiery embers raining down on the city.
Exactly. But remember, these accounts were written during a time of extreme chaos and fear.
Oh, yeah, good point.
It's possible that what people saw was influenced by the dramatic circumstances, you know? Maybe those balls of fire were actually wind-blown embers from the fire itself.
So even those seemingly fantastical details need to be viewed with a critical eye.
Right.
It seems like the true cause of the fire might forever be lost to history.
It's possible. But that doesn't mean we can't still examine the different theories and analyze the evidence we have.
True.
Who knows, maybe one day a new piece of information will surface and finally solve this puzzle.
Fingers crossed. Until then, the speculation and debate are all part of what makes history so captivating.
Right.
It's not just about knowing the facts, it's about trying to piece together the past and understand how events unfolded.
I completely agree. And in the case of the Great Chicago Fire, this lack of a definitive answer allows us to think about not just the events themselves, but also about how we interpret history and the role of storytelling in shaping our understanding of the past.
It's a good reminder that history is more than just a collection of dates and names. It's about human experiences, perspectives, and sometimes even myths that become intertwined with the actual events.
Precisely. Think about the legend of Mrs. O'Leary's cow.
Oh, yeah.
Even though it's been debunked, it's still a part of how many people remember the Great Chicago Fire. It has become a cultural touchstone, a symbol of how quickly a small incident can have catastrophic consequences.
It's interesting how a story, even if it's not true, can take on a life of its own and become part of the collective memory of an event.
Absolutely. And by examining the evolution of that story, how it emerged, spread, and was eventually challenged,
Right.
we can learn a lot about how history is written and how our understanding of the past can change over time.
It's a reminder to be critical thinkers, to question the narratives we're presented with, and to be open to new information and interpretations. So while we might never know for sure what started the Great Chicago Fire, the process of exploring the possibilities and challenging the myths is valuable in itself.
Well said. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I'd like to leave our listeners with one final thought-provoking question.
Okay, on all ears.
We've talked about the physical rebuilding of Chicago, the new building codes, the improved fire department. But what about the emotional impact of the fire? How do you think this event shaped the collective psyche of the city and its residents?
That's a great question to ponder. Experiencing such a widespread, devastating event must have left an indelible mark on the people of Chicago.
Yeah.
Perhaps it fostered a sense of resilience, a shared understanding of vulnerability, or maybe even a heightened awareness of the importance of community and collective action.
Those are all excellent points.
Right.
And it makes you wonder, how do those emotional legacies, those intangible impacts, continue to shape the city of Chicago today?
That's something for our listeners to think about. It goes back to the idea that history is an ongoing conversation. We can learn about the events of the past, analyze them, debate them, but we can also explore how those events continue to influence us in ways we might not even fully realize.
Beautifully said. The Great Chicago Fire, while a tragedy of immense proportions, is also a testament to human resilience, innovation, and the enduring power of storytelling.
It's a story that continues to fascinate and inspire, reminding us that history is not just something we read about in textbooks. It's a living, breathing entity that shapes who we are and the world we live in.
Well said.
Thanks for tuning in to PastCast. We hope today's episode sparked your curiosity for history. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share. Stay curious and join us next time on PastCast.